So I finally decided to watch Miss Marvel, and believe it or not, I binged episodes 2 through 6 in about 6 hours. I can't recall the last time I did that with a TV show, except for maybe season 2 of The Flash, at least a good stretch of it. And to my surprise, it was really, really good. I thought it was really good, at least. And from what I gather, for the most part, people feel pretty much the same. I don't think I would list it in the top tier MCU projects. If this is to be the first season of this character, I'm actually okay with it being 6 episodes because I think that we actually had just enough time to get into Kamala as a character and understand her personality and her mindset and how she relates to other people around her, like her family or her friends at school. Hopefully I'm saying this name right. Iman Vellani? I really tried with that name, I promise. I really, really did. As Kamala Khan, she's very endearing and very likable. And she also looks like a high school kid, and that's something that, unfortunately in entertainment, Hollywood tends to cast actors or actresses that are much older than what we're told that they are in the movies or the shows. Even if she is a few years older, I can't tell. She actually looks like she's 17, and that's one of the biggest compliments I can give. Because it's really easy to cast somebody who's like 10 or 15 years older than they're supposed to be as their character, and when you look at that person, you know that they're not 15. There's no way. Thankfully in this one, it's not the case. The show has a very similar feel to the Tom Holland Spider-Man, particularly the high school aspect, where you could tell that it was trying to appeal to the younger generation who's very much present on social media like Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok. And there's a lot of that stuff that's sprinkled throughout the show when certain people in the neighborhood of Jersey City start spreading the word about the new hero, Miss Marvel, and all the likes and comments start flowing in as the live streams happen. It's pretty obvious who the target demographic is because Marvel is trying to keep the brand alive in some capacity, especially as the newer generation is coming in. As the times evolve, that's bound to happen. But there was a lot of good stuff that I took away from the show, so I didn't have a problem with it in the slightest. I really like the bond that Kamala has with her best friend Bruno, and how he's basically her tech support, kind of like what Ned was for Tom Holland's Peter Parker, and in a way like Freddie Freeman was for Billy Batson in the original Shazam. How she's able to experiment with her powers and figure out the best way to save people and fight crime. In the show we see her fighting the clandestines and the one clandestine son at the climax, but as far as like street level criminals, we don't really see her do that. But I guess you could say in a way it's kind of refreshing to see our lead protagonist in a story like this not take on the usual street level criminals as opposed to somebody like Daredevil or Spider-Man. Not that it doesn't work in those two characters' favors, but in this case it was actually, I thought, kind of refreshing that we don't usually see the typical tropes like that. Another thing about the show is how they portrayed her parents or her family. Her mom and dad could have easily been two-dimensional characters who are very controlling and don't want her to do the things that she wants to do. She does get pushback from her elders and her mom and dad for being in her own little fantasy world and wanting to do things like Captain Marvel or like the other Avengers that she idolizes most of her life. She clashes with them over wanting to go to AvengerCon, but they're not exactly thrilled with her going because of how she might dress provocatively. But I do kind of like how they try to be very enthusiastic and supportive of her to go to AvengerCon, even though it's on their own conditions and terms. Seeing her dad just really getting into the idea of being the Hulk, hoping to go along with her at AvengerCon. I love it whenever I see a dad get that into it to try to get their kid all excited. And another example of how they could have easily been very stereotypical, one-dimensional characters, but they also allude to their history, as they've known each other for most of their lives, that they were going kind of crazy in their youthful days when they bonded over Bon Jovi's Slippery When Wet tour. And the fact that they mentioned that while also using Living on a Prayer during Kamala's one fight in the hotel, as a Bon Jovi fan, I was in heaven. I have been waiting a long time for Marvel to use Bon Jovi songs in a fight scene like this in some capacity. And the fact that they did that...
Enough said.
I also really appreciate how the show represents a certain demographic, in particular, the Muslim American community. Now, to my knowledge, Kamala and her family are Pakistani American and they attend a mosque in Jersey City. And there's one scene in particular where Kamala and her friend Nakia are discussing something while attending a mosque service. Now, I'm not saying we haven't seen a positive portrayal of people who are Muslim or of Middle Eastern descent in entertainment, but unfortunately in today's world, especially post 9/11, I think we tend to see a lot of portrayals of Muslims or Middle Eastern Americans in the stereotypical fashion that they're a terrorist wanting to kill people in a similar fashion of like Al-Qaeda or the Taliban. In this case, we actually get to see people in that community and how they live their lives every day and how they kind of have to live with a big target on their back when they're suspected of suspicious activity by government agencies watching them. In this case, it's the Department of Damage Control, with that one character from Spider-Man No Way Home returning. While also not being the douchebag that he kind of came off as in No Way Home, he's actually chewing out his one subordinate who's really determined to prove that all these superpowered beings are lurking around in this mosque somewhere. And I just love how he chews her out and relieves her of her duty after everything goes haywire at the show's climax. Maybe he's not such a jerk after all. I would like to have my words stricken from the record. Not only that, but the show does a really great job of incorporating actual real-life events into the history of the Marvel Universe. In particular, the British occupation of India. The one episode, I believe it was episode 5, where we see the backstory of Kamala's grandmother and where her mother came from. Her mother was part of that clandestine group that found themselves in another dimension. Kamala's great-grandfather gives a speech to the people in his village about how Gandhi is doing a lot of good things for the people of India, and these British soldiers come by and scare them away. As someone who has a casual knowledge of what went on over there, I did obviously learn about it in high school in world history class, and I do remember seeing the Gandhi movie with Ben Kingsley, who played Gandhi at the time. I don't really remember how the movie went down, but I do remember watching it. It's somewhere in my memory, albeit a very distant memory. Seeing how it affected the locals living under British occupation, and also the fact that they portray Muslims in this positive manner. It could have easily come off as very preachy and too ham-fisted. I honestly didn't get that impression. I found that to be done very, very tastefully. And also very educational to people like myself who aren't really fully aware of what was going on during that time. But that episode is very powerful in one specific way because it shows Kamala helping her grandmother when she was a little girl find her way back to her father. Because Kamala's grandmother tells her that she was carried back into her father's arms by someone who helped her at the train station. If I remember correctly, she couldn't recall who it was. But I really liked how it was Kamala the whole time looking after her grandmother, causing all the stuff to move forward in motion so it would create that natural time loop. And it helps give Kamala all the answers she needs in order to find herself as this new hero for her hometown, while also coming to terms with how she's able to relate to her mother, who might come off as very controlling and very rigid in her beliefs, but she actually is a caring person who wants the best for her daughter. She's just not ready for her to go off and do her own thing, as she tells her in the show. As for the clandestines themselves, they suffer from pretty much a similar problem that most of the MCU villains have faced in the past. Pretty one-dimensional and basic and not much to them under the surface. The only one I guess you could say is kind of easy to relate to is the one clandestine son who Kamala has a crush on and later has to fight at the climax of the show. Because when he finds out that his mother sacrificed herself to close that portal, it makes it a little bit more worth watching when we see him trying to reconcile with what just happened. Therefore, Kamala has to fight him to calm him down. As for Kamala's powers, this was my introduction to Ms. Marvel as a character in general. I don't know anything about her or what her deal is. All I know is from what the show told me, though I do recall seeing her in one of the previews for that Avengers video game that came out some time ago, where her arms stretched out so long and wide, kind of like Mr. Fantastic. Some of the effects looked a little bit hokey and too much for me to take seriously, but Marvel has been known to embrace the weirdness, so I can't necessarily fault him for doing so. It does make for some cool moments with how she's able to create that force field with those crystal-like shields that she comes up with, how she's able to walk on those stepping stones that she creates with her powers, and how she and Bruno experiment on the roof, kind of like how Freddy and Billy did in the Shazam movie. And you could say that Kamala in a lot of ways is like the avatar for the audience that grew up with the MCU, and how she idolizes the Avengers. Like when she goes to Avenger Con and we hear that Star Spangled Man song from the first Avenger playing, Captain America the First Avenger. Now I was 18 when the first Iron Man came out, and when Captain America came in, I was 21. But I guess you could say in a way I was young enough to be very wowed by how the MCU started and how it was able to win over audiences around the world. I guess if anything, it did kind of bring out the kid inside me that I didn't really know was there. It was a reminder of where the MCU came from and how it's going to be going forward with this new generation of heroes. And it makes me look forward to seeing how Ms. Marvel is going to hold herself against all the other new Avengers that they got coming up, with the new Captain America, Shang-Chi, the Eternals, Tom Holland's Spider-Man, if he's supposed to be part of the new Avengers. We'll see how it goes. And I think for someone like Ms. Marvel, who's not really that well known by the public, doing a show about her is probably the best way to do it. Because if you made a movie about her, I don't think it really would have worked as well. Because you need a lot more time with her backstory, whereas a movie, you'd have to condense it into like 2.5 hours or however long they decided to make it. And how she comes up with her name, Ms. Marvel, when her father describes how her name translates into perfect or marvelous in Arabic. And when he said marvelous, I thought, genius. Just like Steve Rogers coming up with Captain America once he rescues those soldiers. Who are you? Captain America. As for the show's ending itself, I was a little confused at first when Brie Larson came in. I thought for a second that she transformed into Captain Marvel, but then we get that text that says Miss Marvel will return in that Marvels project, which I guess is coming out next year. And even though I really like the first Captain Marvel, it doesn't quite as interest me as the other characters do, but it all depends on what they decide to do with her going forward, so we'll see. It does make me wonder, was she in another dimension, or was she way off in another part of the galaxy somewhere? What exactly caused her to swap places with Miss Marvel? It's not a criticism, just a legitimate question that I have. And when it comes to the mention of her powers being the result of a genetic mutation, yet another example of how the MCU is slowly but surely getting us back into the X-Men again. Marvel fans have been wanting to see the MCU's interpretation of the X-Men and mutants, and I guess we kinda got that with the Inhumans show. I never got around to watching it, and Marvel's been trying to find alternate ways to incorporate them, so if anything, makes me look even more forward to seeing how they incorporate this into their universe. All in all, Miss Marvel, I would say, is a really solid show. Maybe not the greatest necessarily, but I had a really good time with it, and I was very, very pleased to see how it turned out. And the show itself is pretty harmless, so for you to say that you hate the show, why? It's not doing anything horrendous. To each his own. Everybody's different. Hoping that we get to see more of Miss Marvel, which we are obviously going to, and it makes me look forward to seeing how she holds herself against all the other Avengers. So those are my thoughts on the show. Thank you guys so much for watching my video, and I really just want to say I really do appreciate you guys throwing your feedback towards me, because this last month or so has been really crazy with my life in general, and the fact that I'm still able to do this and just kind of use this as a way to help me cope with life in general, especially when it comes to work, this means the world to me. So thank you guys so much. I really, really do appreciate it. And anyone who's new, if you like what you see here, just hit that subscribe button down below, and I'll see you guys in the next one.